On May 19, 2009, a moment the whole country had been waiting for arrived. The war had ceased and peace had begun to envelop the country. But the run-up to this moment had been a long and laborious one. Over 3 decades, to be precise. And how did the combined forces of Sri Lanka succeed in vanquishing the once invincible LTTE? Safeguarding the sovereignty and territorial integrity and the protection of its citizens is a paramount duty of the state. In the Sri Lankan context, those very concepts of sovereignty and territorial integrity were constantly threatened and undermined by the LTTE, a terrorist, non-state actor. In this regard, bombs targeting civilians, conscriptions and recruitment of child soldiers, capture of the territory of the Sri Lankan state by force were carried out. The duty then, by default, fell on the democratically elected Sri Lankan governments. The Sri Lankan government had to initiate a humanitarian operation as a means to a peaceful end. Through the 80s, 90s and early 2000s, the armed forces fought back with discipline, countering the atrocities of the LTTE and violation of human rights. But countless lives were lost and the war dragged on. However, attempts by successive governments to solve this issue through negotiations failed. The LTTE challenged and attempted to undermine the sovereignty and territorial integrity of the Sri Lankan state. In the midst of this quagmire, hope raised its voice when on the 19th of November 2005, President Mahinda Rajapaksa came to power with a majority vote base. He took home the reins, keen on reconciliation and rebuilding, ethnic unity and religious harmony. His call for peace was ignored, and the LTTE continued their rampage on civilian targets, including the Muslim population, with a renewed fervor. It conscripted over 5,794 child soldiers during the conflict and activated countless female suicide bombers. Captured footage revealed a semi-conventional organized army with well-planned, sophisticated training centers imparting superior skills in endurance and weapon training. It was with such a radical organization that the Sri Lankan army was waging a long-drawn battle. On 15th June 2006, the LTTE attacked a bus, killing at least 64 civilians at Kabithugolava. Action had to be taken to avoid a man-made catastrophe, but this time the strategy was different. The military strategy began with adopting new tactics, superior weaponry and common sense. The task was chiefly in the hands of the Sri Lankan army, assisted by the Air Force, Navy, Civil Defence Force and the police. Mention must be made of Gotabaya Rajapaksa, a retired lieutenant colonel who as defense secretary subscribed to the appointment of high-performance youngsters with previous battlefield experience as commanders, encouraged weapons systems procurement, recruitment and training. Most importantly, preparations were made for a prolonged engagement with consistent maintenance of momentum. 5 more divisions were created. Recruitment shot up from 3,000 per year to 34,000 in a single year. The strength of the army rose to over 175,000 and 90 new battalions were created. The military leadership adopted an infantry training doctrine that emphasized sectional level small unit infantry operations, and the Special Infantry Operations Team SIOT model of 8 to 6 men was enforced. Multiple thrust fronts were maintained and increased from 3 to 8 at times. Commando and Special Forces units were extensively used behind LTTE lines, and these operations led to the interception and elimination of numerous LTTE field commanders, groups, and fortifications. During 2006 and 2009, the Army lost 191 officers and 5,082 other ranks in action. In addition, 905 officers and 27,230 other ranks were seriously wounded. Over 1,500 sergeants and corporals were commissioned as officers to meet shortages and operational exigencies. Despite the obstacles, the military adopted stringent security measures to contain and intercept LTTE cells, aided by increasingly successful intelligence gathering operations, while the LTTE adopted a defensive military strategy in order to maintain the captured territory. The main objective of the forces shifted to inflicting high attrition rates on the LTTE, rather than recapture of territory and maintaining the initiative by launching continuous offensive operations along multiple thrust lines to divide and destroy LTTE forces. On the 24th of March 2004, a breakaway Tamil rebel group led by the LTTE Eastern Tamil commander V. Muralidharan or Colonel Karuna broke away from the main LTTE force, defecting to the government side. With his defection, key intelligence flowed into the hands of the armed forces. With the closure of the Mavilaru sluice gate by the LTTE, thousands of civilian farmers were deprived of their right to water. A humanitarian operation was initiated by the government to liberate the Mavilaru sluice gate to facilitate water to civilians. In the events that followed, areas such as Sampur, Muthur and Toppigala, the strongholds of LTTE terrorists, were recaptured, and the LTTE were unable to conduct anything more than low-intensity operations in the east. From the Sri Lanka Navy's perspective, its role was to achieve sea control and enforce sea denial. The ceasefire had been misused by the LTTE to acquire military equipment, arms and ammunition. The Sri Lankan Navy countered this threat with a small boat concept. These naval boats had superior speed, high maneuverability and lethal firepower, similar to the weapon outfit of the Dora fast attack craft. These boat squadrons effectively countered the LTTE's suicide craft threat. Over 150 such boats were indigenously built. Sri Lankan Navy had to eliminate floating warehouses of the LTTE to dominate the blue waters and to assist ground battle. These floating warehouses were located and destroyed. With the escalation of the war, the Sri Lankan Air Force transformed itself into a truly modern and high-tech fighting force, successfully confronting the world's first ever terrorist air wing. Its strategy shifted from being a reactive one to a proactive approach to its preparedness. Its strength was increased from 1,000 men in 1951 to 27,000 men and 1,300 officers, with the addition of fighter jet aircraft squadrons, helicopter squadrons and transport aircraft squadrons, both fixed-wing and rotor-wing helicopters. The latest technology, such as unmanned aerial vehicle systems, was introduced so that the real-time information on operations could be seen. Live pictures of targets were taken, and the attack aircraft were fitted with reliable self-protecting systems, allowing the pilots the liberty of attacking their targets at a careful pace. As the war between the legitimate Sri Lanka armed forces and the LTTE terrorists escalated, the latter resorted to inhumane violence, targeting civilians and their property. Explosions in trains, buses, and public places became rampant. The battle reached a point where the LTTE began to spew its arsenal in a show of desperation. The LTTE deployed the Air Tigers, and in brazen acts of defiance, its planes targeted the civilian and economic targets such as Kalanithissa Power Station, Kolonava Oil Refinery, Katunaika Airport, and the Inland Revenue Building. Suicide bombers went on a rampage, even in the guise of pregnant women, in a deadly low-intensity campaign throughout Sri Lanka, targeting internationally protected persons such as diplomats, key politicians, government officials, civilians, and military commanders. Slowly but surely, the LTTE's weapon depots, training camps, top-secret bunkers began to be captured and revealed to the media. But the struggle was not just between two armies, but rather people caught in the mire of a war reaching its desperate moments. Their economy was in shambles. Even essential items were a rarity. The landscape of their surrounding was desolate, and generation after generation was being born into a life of gunfire and strife. While the advance of the Sri Lankan army